Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started just so we can stay on time today. My name is Emily Prince. I am a third-year law student here at Tulane, and I had the great honor of being the Summit Chair last year. So for some reason, they wanted to keep me involved and invited me to moderate the panel today. So I'm going to start off by introducing our first presenter, Johanna Gillian, who is the founder and executive director of Grow Dat Youth Farm. Joanna began her food education over 10 years ago with the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and in 2006 she returned to New Orleans to work with the New Orleans Food and Farm Network, and later launched her own consulting business called Clean Plates Projects. Her most visible work as a consultant was the school food reform with middle school youth at the nonprofit Rethink, which generated national attention for its innovative approach and hard-hitting success. It was eventually profiled on HBO's Weight of the Nation. In 2011, Johanna founded Grow Dat Youth Farm in collaboration with Tulane University. Since its inception, Grow Dat has become the largest farm in New Orleans, employing more than 150 young adults to grow over 40,000 pounds of food. Johanna has received many awards, including the City Park Presidential Award, the Young Alumni Award from Tulane University, and the City Business Woman of the Year nomination, and the Gambit's 40 Under 40 Award. Johanna.
Hi, good morning. Well, I was thinking about how to start this talk, and I was thinking of myself when I was about 11 or 12, and I was like just born an environmentalist, and at that point in time was really thinking, I want to become a lawyer, I'm going to sue the pants off of some bad guys, and I would have been a terrible lawyer. Like that, I'm really glad that I didn't actually follow through on that childhood dream. I think I'm a decent entrepreneur, but definitely would not have been a great lawyer. But I tip my hat to all of you in the field of environmental law. My 12-year-old self is cheering you on and with you. So, quick question. I guess just to start off, I always like to get a sense of what people are interested in. So, are there a few brave people willing to say, like, why did you choose this panel this morning? What are you interested in hearing about? It's probably not how you do it in law school. Yeah?
I'm from Chicago, so I just like hearing about how a city like that can become a lot more eco-friendly when you like
cool.
combining something like great cities and great towers and all that.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm from San Francisco. I'm an ecology student here, and one of the science museums in San Francisco actually has an urban farm program.
Cool.
They have a rooftop farm on top of the entire building.
Amazing.
In the middle of Golden Park. So I want to come to this, see what's up.
Cool. Great. So interested in like really this intersection of food production and city spaces. Great. Anything else? This side of the room? Want to represent? Yeah.
A little bit about how you've provided some job opportunities.
Okay, great. What it looks like to actually generate some amount of employment opportunities in this sector. Okay, we can talk about all of those things as soon as I can figure out how to operate a PC. Oh, God. Sorry. The one thing I was supposed to do, you showed me. It's totally my fault. Okay, so, yeah, that's me. Thank you. I can do. So my name is Johanna, as I said, and I began this work at 12. I began this work really kind of during and after college. I went to Tulane and became really interested while at Tulane. I went abroad to study in Thailand in a pretty non-traditional program where I spent a lot of time kind of understanding globalization from the context of Thai citizens that I was like learning alongside and from. And a lot of them were farmers involved in a movement called Via Campesina, which is an international farmers movement. And so it was a really interesting moment, 2001, 2002. A lot of folks that I was like meeting were really transitioning from having kind of not participated at all in a traditional economic society, you know, a lot of what they had done had been subsistence farming and bartering, and were now kind of launched into this realm of genetic modification and patents and ownership, and really trying to find a way to, moving rapidly towards a commodity system in Thailand, and so really trying to find a way to maintain not just their well-being financially, but also culturally. Like, all of these, like, just long-standing traditions were changing really quickly as they were transitioning what they were growing. So it was a really interesting introduction to me, for me, into the international realm of food and farming, and how my choices as an American consumer were impacting these, like, small-scale farmers across the globe. And then I returned here, where I was working a lot with young adults, and seeing kind of on the other end, from the producer end to the consumer end, a lot of the young people that I was working with at middle schools in Central City. I would bring snacks to these after-school reading programs, and they just hadn't had exposure to, like, a lot of fruits and vegetables that I had as a kid. So kind of seeing the way that both low-income consumers in the United States and farmers, small-scale farmers internationally, were both being squeezed by this industrial food system on either end of the spectrum, and became interested in thinking about what role I could play to be involved in changing that. So fast forward to about 10 years later, I launched an organization called Grodat Youth Farm. How many people have heard of or been to Grodat? Just as a sense. Okay, great. So I want to give a little bit of context, I guess, as to why I was really excited to accept this speaking opportunity. I, as an environmentalist, am very excited to see the way that talking about food and farming and environmental issues are no longer two separate conversations. And I think it really needs to be that way. So I'm really excited that this is a conference track here, because I think that the less we silo those two conversations, the more impactful we will be. And I think that, like, recognizing that food and agriculture are both at the forefront of climate change in terms of where we're going to feel the impacts of where we are feeling the impacts of climate change, where we will continue to feel the impacts of climate change, and an interesting turn point in terms of mitigating. There's a lot of opportunities to mitigate further climate change harm through agriculture. You know, it's just a matter of how we are growing our food. So the 2013 UN report really emphasized our need to rapidly transition our global food system right now to smaller scale sustainable methods for a lot of reasons. Soil preservation, small scale farming is much more drought tolerant, which is an increasing issue. There's immense capacity for carbon sequestration in small scale farming. All of these things, I think, we're reaching these critical tipping points. So I just think it's a great opportunity to be talking about the way we eat and the way we grow our food as an environmental issue. So that's my little plug for why I'm excited to be here. And I think that while urban agriculture is never going to be it's never going to be the way we get all of our food. I don't think that's what's most important about agriculture, is like how much food can we grow. I think it is a really critical part of the larger food systems. It's a really important component in food systems, because it is a place to connect people who live in cities who are disconnected from where their food comes from and kind of the broader environment that they live in to food, and this idea that, like, we really need to be mindful and innovative about how we grow our food. And that doesn't just mean, like, growing it in the city. That means making good decisions with our land use, with policies, with how and where we buy our food, that supports the regional health of a rural food system too. So that's why I'm excited to be here. So I will now tell our story, and I think hopefully by way of telling this story, it'll give you a little bit of a sense of a case study through which you can explore some of the questions that you might have. So our mission at Grodat is to nurture a diverse group of young leaders through the meaningful work of growing food. So we are really both youth leadership development organization and sustainable farm in the city, located in City Park, and we are in our 6th year as an organization this year. So go through a little bit of our history. this is an outline that gives you a brief sense, not that important, but basically 2010 I was brought on by Tulane actually. I'd had this idea long ago after coming back from Thailand to start this farm that hired young adults to grow food in the city, and then kind of it percolated for a long time, and then while I was working for the New Orleans Food and Farm Network was doing a bunch of projects with Tulane City Center, which is the outreach arm of the School of Architecture. The Food and Farm Network would provide some amount of, training and seeds, tools for people in community gardens, and then Tulane City Center might come to build some small piece of built infrastructure, a tool shed or a rain catchment system or something like that. So we were kind of testing these little projects in a post-Katrina landscape that were marrying, infrastructure and knowledge and resources and community building. And through that became aware that Scott Cowan, then president of Tulane, was interested in seeing the university support something like the Edible Schoolyard. He had met Alice Waters and was really excited about the Edible Schoolyard model. So I was contacted as the expert on gardening and farming, and more just because they knew that I had had this idea for a long time, and so we kind of pitched this idea, and here we are today. All right, so this is what we started with. This is our site in pre-2011 in City Park. We began with a piece of a park. More importantly, a former golf course, pre-Katrina. This wasn't an operating golf course up until the storm. It had not been a golf course since before that, but its last incarnation was as a golf course. You can see in that long fairway, that was the former fairway of the golf course, where they'd tee up. So it had since basically converted kind of back to cropland. And in 2011, we met with them, and they gave us the green light to use 4 acres of this space for food production, for our farm concept. So this is us, basically 4 years later. We have converted, so there's probably a... okay, so this is, our original property line was here. We were originally granted 4 acres. As you can see, there's a lot of trees and other growth on our site that prohibited field agriculture. Clearly, we're not going to take out any cypress trees or grow in areas that are not appropriate for field agriculture on our site. So we kind of maxed out our current productive space at about 2 acres with this here. There's a small garden space in the front, and then these spots back here. So then we requested a land extension, and were given to this space in 2013. So that gave us a total of about 7 acres to operate on. I'm sorry, these spaces were about 1.5 acres, and then we added this, and we're now at about 2 acres total. We have one more spot on our current space right here that in the fall we will be cover cropping and converting into what we're calling the final frontier on the farm, which will bring us to about 3 acres of production all told. This is a little close-up, just to get a sense of our rural agriculture. So some of the interesting things about converting a golf course into a farm. We were really concerned that there may be high levels of arsenic or other contaminants in the soil from how they had treated it as a golf course, but we went through a phase 1 ESA and we're cleared, and we've done soil testing and even plant tissue testing since then, and have come up clean every time, which is great. So we didn't have to contend with any serious remediation, which was a major benefit and boon to the project. Could have cost us a lot more and slowed us down a lot. And you can see up here, these are shells. What are these lines in the ground? These are shells that were under the old golf cart pathways. So just interesting to live with kind of what was before as we have converted this into a farm. In addition to the work that we've done to develop the farm site, which I'll talk a little bit more about the farm site in a minute, but we created a campus on our space. A campus is definitely not necessary, like the amount of infrastructure that we have is not necessary for food production, but given our mission to do public education, it is a great resource for us. So this is an initial mock-up of the site design. The site was designed and built by Tulane City Center. So working collaboratively with the School of Architecture, we were able to do a really high-quality, award-winning campus that was very low cost to us. We used mostly recycled materials and tons of student labor that really brought down the costs. So the design is based around using shipping containers, which I actually think, you know, there's a lot of architects that want to build things out of shipping containers. I think sometimes it's not appropriate, but I think in the setting of a farm, it's a great use. They're mostly for storage. There's a lot of them here that we're not using, and they're really secure. So students began by building these pillars here, and then lifting them in by crane and setting these containers down on the pillars. They then filled in with roofs and shade structures that helped to kind of create a space in between the containers. This is our post-harvest handling area, so this is where we wash and prep all of our produce. This is our outdoor classroom space. And then this large container, the back half of it has been retrofitted into a cold storage container. So that's been an incredibly cost-efficient way to store our produce, which is actually a pretty common issue for small farms and urban farms. It's hard for them to hold produce. So we use this for youth programming. This is some of our first. This is the first year that we were operating actually on the farm in 2012. We also use it for community events and are kind of continuing to expand the ways that we can use the space, not just for our purposes as a farm, but also as a community education space and gathering space. This is a shot of our campus. Things I love about our campus, it was designed with environmental sustainability very much at the forefront, which has also been really great for us financially. We have a very low overhead. We spend about $150 a month in electricity bills. All of our gray water is recycled, and we have composting toilets, so we're able to model environmental sustainability. We're also able to keep our overhead very low as an organization, which has been fantastic. And the site is beautiful and has won several very prestigious design awards, including a SEED award. So we didn't have to compromise on a comfortable, beautiful space. So this is a little visual history of our site. You can see this is what we began with, just grass. And it just took a lot of time and a lot of people removing the grass, adding amendments, building beds. These are young people in our program year of 2012. The main challenge for us was building soil fertility. So I think that that's a real issue that we come up against as we're trying to turn spaces back into productive agricultural spaces. Soil health does not happen overnight. It takes time and it takes inputs, and a lot of those inputs we've had inconsistency with being able to get them in the city. So we started off with a lot of composted horse manure. We've used a lot of coffee chaff, but the input streams are often changing depending upon when it is. So one of the, I think, issues right now that people are facing, even if it's just with starting their own backyard garden, is there's not a great source for high quality soil right now, which is something that has to be in place in order for us to grow food of any kind. This has also been an issue that we have experienced as just over several years with climate change. One of the challenges that we've experienced is very heavy rainfall, and that washes out a lot of the soil nutrients. So we have had periods of fertility issues within our soil, which is a mix of kind of not having a great amendments or inputs, but then also that's one of the current challenges in terms of production from a climate change perspective. So as we've grown the farm over each year, we've been able to increase the amount of food that we've been growing. We started in 2011 at the Holly Grove Market and Farm, working with 11 young adults who harvested about 2,000 pounds of food that year. 70% of everything we grow we sell. The other 30% we share with young people and our shared harvest partners. So we're either donating or selling at a subsidized cost. We've grown to 20,000 pounds of food this year on 2 acres in City Park. We're working now with 50 young adults each year involved in the organization. The farm is operational October through June. And as you can tell from these are chronological, these photos. As you can tell, over the years our soil fertility has become much better, and we have been able to really enhance our production even on the same amount of space. We've been able to increase our poundage, which has been due in a lot of ways to try and really concentrate on building soil health. We use some metric in order to understand our productivity. Most farmers do not measure the pounds of food that they grow, and that's not like a normal for-profit farm activity. Somewhat tedious, but it does help us set metrics and reach goals with our young adults and just give us some sense of where we're going. We also capture, of course, how much money we make and how many shared harvest partners we work with, things like that. It's a little history of our site. It's very beautiful. If you haven't been, you should come out on a Saturday. Get a tour. One other way that we've expanded our space over the last several years is we've really begun to look at what are the different components of a farm beyond just the food production spaces. So thinking a lot about the idea of agroecology. What are the parts of our farm where we're building beneficial pest habitat, where we're creating bird habitat because we're growing food inside of this larger ecosystem. So wanting to create a healthy ecosystem in general. So we've got about an acre behind our actual campus that's now dedicated to, through a partnership with the Audubon Institute, creating birding habitat, which also gives us an opportunity to be engaging people about larger environmental issues like biodiversity loss, and how those things relate to food and farming. So just a little bit about our program model for those people interested in the nuts and bolts. We started as an organization that would work with young adults through this 5-month leadership program. It's about 250 hours. Our goal is to bring young people together who don't normally interact together, so we have a mix of private and public partner schools that we work with. Young people apply to be a part of the program. We usually have about twice as many applicants as participants, and then they participate in a 5-month leadership program through which they are working on the farm, they're harvesting, they're selling produce at market, they're sharing it with shared harvest partners, they're going through workshops and classes to broaden their understanding of food and environmental justice. And building, what we see in this process is a transformational experience in which there's a really dynamic learning community that promotes individual change and growth, that then, the idea is, fosters larger social change. So we began with this, with our leadership program right here, which was 5 months. And then we really started getting a lot of young adults that wanted to come back and continue working with us, so we added this advanced leadership program. So young people can, at the close of the program, apply to return and then participate in another 4 months of training, about 170 hours, in which they are given the chance to prepare to lead the next group of young people through the program. So we're now working with 15 to 25-year-olds, and it's about 95% alumni run, the leadership program itself. We offer year-long fellowships for people who are in our kind of key leadership roles called crew leaders. And then assistant crew leaders can come back. Those are young people that are still in high school to support the crew leaders and lead the leadership program. So we work with 40 new young adults each year, and then about 12 that move into the advanced leadership program. There's 3 main goals. The first is really developing the leadership skills of young adults in our community through farm work. That happens in a lot of different ways. It's really a mix of the work, the accountability systems that we use that help people learn learn or grow specific values or traits that we all agree to work according to. So a lot of this is the soft skills development that you hear so much about people lacking in this job market, really helping young people understand what it looks like to be responsible, be productive, like work in a community context, demonstrate commitment, and then a lot of it is also building specific hard skills and content knowledge. And then our second goal is really about food production, growing food for our community and making sure that we're getting that food to people who need it. That happens through our Shared Harvest program. We, young people, run markets every week. We have a crew of young adults right now at the Crescent City Farmers Market. Our produce that's sold goes to a CSA that we run. We now have a 60-member fall and 60-member spring CSA. We sell through markets and a little bit to restaurants. There's somewhat insatiable demand for local produce in New Orleans right now, a very limited regional food system, which gives a lot of opportunity, but we could triple or quadruple the size of our farm and still only make a tiny dent in what's possible in terms of providing local produce in the city. And then the third goal is really to engage the broader community on our site. So we're doing more and more of this as we grow as an organization. We're now starting to do training and consulting work with external audiences that want to replicate our model in some way. We're beginning to work with alumni to help them organize their own strategies and campaigns towards a more just food system. We are starting a series of community education events and activities that often alumni are hired into positions to lead, such as field trip programs or farm dinners. And I guess that's it. So I think that is the overview from my perspective. I think to leave you with one thought, it's just to say that it's very possible to take land in a city and turn it into a farm. It's happening all over the country, which is really exciting. It's happened before. We've had periods of producing way more of our food at a very local level, whether that's in our own backyard gardens or in community gardens. And I think that there's a real awakening happening right now that's recognizing that we want and need more control over our food, which is great. And I think that urban farming has a really important role in that. And I think that role is partly actually growing the food, but a lot of it is just creating an awareness and a space for people inside cities to have conversations about food and to deepen their relationship with food so that we can address larger issues that are really affecting our rural food system. Land loss in our area is clearly an issue. Land ownership, there's a lot of change that I've been hearing about happening right now in who is owning farmland. So I think thinking about what our role is as city dwellers in terms of not just creating food right here in the city, but relating to the rural spaces and communities in which food is being grown, and how can we foster healthier rural communities and healthier land policies that make sure that smaller farmers are given more opportunities to grow food and corporate control is limited to the greatest extent possible. That's it.
Thank you. So for anyone who came in late and is here for CLE credit, I just wanted to remind you to please sign in with our room monitor, Allison, before you leave. So next, I'm going to bring up Pepper Bowen to introduce our next speaker.
Good morning. My name is Pepper Bowen. I am in my last year at Loyola Law, studying or focusing on international environmental legal practice, law, and policy. And it is my honor and distinct pleasure to introduce Marianne Capone, who is not only an amazing person, an advocate for social justice, but also an environmental attorney. She has an alumna of Boston College and the University of Miami. She heads the Environmental Policy Lab at Loyola Law. She also manages the Environmental Law Program. She appears in print and television, radio, other media, magazines, professional content. She has testified in front of Congress. She is barred in Florida, the United States District Courts. I've got to read this because it's a long list. The United States District Courts, the Middle District of Florida, the Louisiana Bar, the United States District Court, Eastern and Middle Districts of Louisiana, the United States Supreme Court, the American Bar Association Section of Environment and Energy and Resources, and the American Fisheries Society. Wow. So, of the many things that Mary Ann is involved in, she's also the executive director of Recirculating Farms, which is in Central City. That program not only does urban farming, it also has an education component, and they are doing just incredible things in order to bring not only fairness and justice to farmers, but also to improve what it is that we eat locally. Without further ado, Mary Ann Capone.
Wow, I feel like I should sit down and turn this over to somebody else. So the thing that Pepper didn't mention is she's also one of my students.
I've said.
And also an intern at Recirculating Farms Coalition. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, wait, there's more. All right, I might need some help on this to get to mine. Oh, wait, we're making progress. How do I swap presentations? I'll trade it out for you. That'd be great. Thanks. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Perfect. Thank you. All those bar associations, and I can't work a PowerPoint. Yeah. So I want to mention just one thing. I wasn't going to start this way, but since Johanna did, so when I was 10 years old, I thought I was going to be a vet. And then I realized that I was way too ornery to do anything but be a lawyer. And so that's how I ended up in the legal profession and sort of married some science with law and came to environmental law. And it has served me well over the years. I am very grateful that I took that as a career and very grateful that I ended up in, among other things, urban farming work, especially here in New Orleans. So I'm just going to go through these pictures quickly on this first slide. So I didn't do a lot of photos of our farm because my talk is more about some of the challenges in the legal and policy world with urban farming in New Orleans and elsewhere, from our own growth of our own farm here, but also in working with other farms and farmers around the country. So the top picture that looks like it's in a hoop house that's one of several hoop houses that we have on a half-an-acre lot in Central City in New Orleans. For those of you who don't know where that is, Central City is down by the CBD, Central Business District, and our farm is about a block in from Houston's Restaurant on St. Charles. We have an unbelievable location. We're one block off the streetcar. Come visit us sometime. We do a variety of things, as you'll see throughout the presentation. That middle picture is hydroponic towers that we helped implement on the top of Rouse's in the CBD. They are growing herbs and vegetables that they are selling actually in the grocery store. You certainly can't get more local than that. And that is the cityscape behind it. This is one of my favorite photographs because I think it really embodies the concept of urban farming. And then that last photo is Ika Crawford, who happens to be sitting right there. Ika's been an urban grower in New Orleans for about 10 plus years. She has a degree in horticulture and has her own farms as well as works with us at Recirculating Farms Coalition. That's her teaching a class. We do beginning, intermediate, and advanced classes for adults who want to be growers. And that's her teaching one of our groups of adults at one of our sites in Central City. So Recirculating Farms Coalition is a very interesting name. People ask me pretty regularly what the heck that means. And what it means is what it sounds like. We work with innovative growing methods that involve recirculating water and waste. And so we do things like hydroponics, aquaculture, and aquaponics. And the aquaculture is land-based systems, either ponds or tanks, where all the water and waste is recycled. So we're actually a nonprofit national organization. We're headquartered here in New Orleans, and so we work with growers all around the country. Our primary mission is to use recirculating farms, hydroponics, aquaculture, aquaponics, to address problems with food quality, availability, and affordability. And we're very concerned about, as Johanna said, the idea of incorporating environmental concerns with food production. Here in the United States, we're not always great at that, and we are also trying to push the movement forward of reclaiming local food and doing sustainable production locally. Our organization started back in January 2009, and I saw Tim walk in the room a minute ago. There you are. Tim is an old colleague of mine from Food and Water Watch. I used to direct the Fish and Oceans program there, and our organization actually grew out of a program at Food and Water Watch, and we became an independent organization in 2011, and so this is our 5th-year anniversary this year, and we're very excited that we've been around this long and managed to grow into a national strong group. We work with thousands of farmers, fishermen, foodies, scientists, educators, pretty much everyone you can imagine on these issues. So some of the stuff that we do in particular is that we work in local, state, and national law and policy. We work with city councils like the New Orleans City Council. We've done things like help push mobile food vending permits in the city. We helped redo the comprehensive zoning ordinance that added some benefits to urban growing. There's still some problems with it, and we're working those out, but also helped try and build in some support for urban farming in New Orleans. We do things at the state level. Last year, Pepper and a few of my other students worked on a project to help institute a farm-to-school program in the state of Louisiana that passed last summer. We work with folks in U.S. Congress doing national legislation. This year we've worked on farm-to-school programs, and we also do things with various U.S. agencies, USDA, of course, also different programs under USDA. For example, the National Organics Program. We're working to develop unique standards for hydroponics and aquaponics in U.S. organics, among other things. So our farm here in New Orleans is called Growing Local NOLA. And these photos, so the one photo of the bamboo towers, we decided that we wanted to move away from plastics and synthetics in our growing process. And so we've been piloting different systems that used natural materials, and one of our favorite materials that we found is bamboo. You can grow it locally, which means you could actually grow your own materials to build your own farm. Much of this bamboo came from my own backyard. And so we have built hydroponic towers and raft systems. We've dug into the ground instead of using synthetic tubs or plastics or glass. There's a lot of different options. We dug into the ground and we use food-grade rubber to line it. And we are growing in these different systems. And to the right is our youngest gardener, Dalton. We also host raised garden beds. We have a community garden as well. We have 2 different lots, one commercial, one community, and we host a variety of different programs and options on the community lot. And Dalton, he's just 11 years old, and that's his box that he's sitting in front of, and he is becoming an avid gardener and grows his own food for him and his mother. So we also host a variety of free classes at our community lot. We do cooking classes, exercise classes, gardening, and as you saw before, professional urban farming classes. We host the community raised beds. Right now we have 14 community gardeners. They offer us 12 hours a month in service, and everything they get is free. The boxes are free, the soil, the seeds, the water, everything, and they get instruction from our farm manager, Ika, and others who are on site every day. We also have a mini community-supported agriculture program. It's nowhere near the size of Gerdats. We have 10 people every week that come and get a $15 share. We're hoping to expand that. We've been slowly increasing it, but it's very exciting for us. The neighborhood of Central City, for those of you who are not that familiar, is very low income, and there isn't a full-service grocery store there, and so access to healthy, fresh food is very limited. And so the neighbors are very excited to have a farm nearby where they can come and get food. And so we do sell direct to consumer as well, not just through the CSA. And so while we're servicing 10 people a week, we also service way more than that, because people will come to the farm and purchase things like eggs and vegetables throughout the week. I will say that you can't sell from your farm site in New Orleans. It's one of those funny little laws that they have, and because we have a commercial site and a community garden, we actually can sell at the community garden what we've grown on the commercial site. So we also sell direct to small neighborhood restaurants, and so all of this has been helping us maintain and expand our programs, and we hope to do more in the future. So overall, what do? We inspire healthy lifestyles. We create edible green space. That's a really good picture of what our community site looked like when we first built it. It's much more green and lush now. That's our very pretty glass greenhouse that we have on the site. And we grow the growers, and this particular picture is a nod to Gerddat, because before we had our own site, Johanna and Leo and Jabari and all the folks over at Gerddat let us teach classes at their garden and helped us actually with our commercial farming classes. And that's Johanna's grower, Jabari. I don't know his title these days, but he's one of the growers and one of the leaders there at the site teaching one of our classes. So overall, we like to think that we're increasing access to healthy, fresh food, providing green spaces, creating jobs, and promoting community, very similar to the missions of Gerddat. And it's very nice, I think, too, here in New Orleans, a lot of the different farming entities and leaders are fairly good about communicating and working together these days. And I think that's really important. Johanna mentioned that we are overwhelmed with the need for healthy, fresh food here in New Orleans, and the reality is we could have probably 50 more farms and still not meet that need. So it's really not a competition situation as it is so much a support system for healthy, fresh, local food. So some of the challenges that we had in creating our farm, and those that we've heard from others, are land access and the affordability of land. Proximity to people and transportation, meaning there's a lot of land available in New Orleans, thanks to Hurricane Katrina, thank you, and other matters, but some of it is not necessarily where you might want to put a facility, meaning there's not enough people or not enough infrastructure to locate a successful urban farm there. Parking is always an issue. Of course, we're in a city, and so if you are trying to have a facility where people can come and get food, you need some place for people to park, or at least you need public transportation to get them there. Bathrooms were a big issue for us, so I think you're on state land, right? Is it state-owned land? Yeah, so I wanted to mention that because Gerddat has a bunch of things that I can't have, including composting toilets and some other things, because there is a difference between city-owned land and state-owned land and federally owned land in terms of permitting and what's allowed. So, for example, we really wanted composting toilets, and we can't have them. And so we have porta potties right now because I don't really want us to hook into the sewage structure. Our gardens up until last month fully ran on solar power, but it got really expensive. And we are doing aquaponics, which is growing fish and plants together in one system. And so we killed our fish a couple of times over the course of the last year when there wasn't enough sun to keep the pumps running. And so we decided that we would sacrifice our desire to run entirely on solar for the good of keeping our fish alive. And so we added some electricity on one of the lots. The community lot's still all on solar, but the commercial lot now has power to it. And zoning. Zoning was one of the biggest issues for us. The lots we had, we were told they were commercial, the maps said they were commercial, the landowner said they were commercial, and then the day we went to pull the building permit, we found out that they were residential, RM4, which basically means residential multifamily 4. So I could build a high-rise building on our lots, but not a garden. So that was pretty interesting. So we had to go through some massive political and legal acrobatics to actually get the farm on the lots that they were slated for. And we actually had moved several times prior to that due to similar issues. Land here is a premium in New Orleans, and you might not think so because there's lots of empty space, but the reality is people believe that someday this city is going to be worth millions more than it is today, and nobody wants to give up their property. So, so we've had to do a lot of work in terms of land accessibility and affordability for growers. There are a lot of programs out there. We actually wrote a manual for farmers on it, on how to access land. There are different programs available. There's Habitat for Humanity. There's a Grow to Own program with the city. There's options for private leasing, and so it may be challenging, but it's out there. You really just have to spend the time to figure out what's the best location. So permitting, I wanted to talk about. Believe it or not, for a city that largely flies under the radar on a lot of things, when it comes to food and farming, they're pretty serious. You need permits for selling products. You need to know about what you can and can't sell under the cottage food law that came about in 2013. Cottage food is meaning it's a private, you know, like in my kitchen, I could bake blueberry muffins and sell them under the cottage food law. But there are certain things that you can and can't do, and especially as a farm, there are certain things you can and can't do. You need a permit for selling plants. If you want to sell baby plants from your greenhouse, you need a greenhouse permit. To build, you need a building permit. You need to go through the unbelievably long process for electricity, for water, and for occupancy. And so all of these things are very challenging to navigate. A lot of farmers I know have had major difficulties with this, right, Ika? I mean, just from your own personal experience?
That, yeah, there's all of these things that are required for the infrastructure of urban farming, and I think that's why it's really important that we develop these spaces. And I'd like, you know, maybe like I like your idea of like the vertical farming, because when you're talking about growing in cityscapes, we have to start changing the way that we approach growing food. Like, you have to be able to grow a lot of food in a little space. And I think that research with the hydro and aquaponics that we're doing sort of, or will at some point, bring that kind of alternative to cityscape growing.
Yeah, and they have to be open to it. I mean, that's part of the challenge, too. Sorry, I sound terrible, I know. It actually sounds worse than it is. I think that's part of the challenge, too, is getting folks on the same page with understanding things like solar power and rain barrels and vertical growing and alternate forms of growing, you know, things that might be good for the environment, figuring out good soil amendments and how to build up the soil and things like that, versus what we're allowed to do here in the city. So some of the other things that we've encountered, insurance challenges, things like premises liability. What happens if somebody gets bonked in the face with a rake? What happens, you know, professional liability, things like when you write manuals or brochures or put stuff on your website. Products liability, what happens if somebody gets sick with something that you grew and sold. And then simple things like workers' comp and medical and dental for your employees. All of these things are really challenging to get as a farm. I don't know how your experience has been, but insurance is expensive and difficult because when you tell an insurance company that you run a farm, they think tractors and tillers and massive farm equipment and chippers and turbines and things, and they don't think of a small urban space that we might have here that has a lot less risk and a lot different approach. And so you get grouped in with these big farms that you can't afford insurance, and yet you need it, right? So if you're renting a lot, certainly any responsible landlord's going to tell you that they need insurance, but you're being told that your insurance is $20,000 a year because they think you're a big, huge operator. And so there's this kind of catch-22 that you need insurance but can't afford the insurance, but need the insurance and can't afford the insurance. And so I feel like we've made some progress with that here. We've been finding more carriers that are willing to give affordable insurance to small urban farms. And similarly with the professional liability. The city of New Orleans is really coming around, I think, to urban farming. They're starting to realize that it's an industry here and a profession here that's growing, and it's a profession here that's growing in a way that makes the restaurants and the community happy. One of the most interesting things I find about New Orleans is that the chefs here are not just willing, but are excited and happy to come and buy local food at your farm. And the only other city where I've seen it so active is New York City, actually, where the chefs will go to the farm and take a look at what you have going and decide if you are safe and sustainable, and they'll buy directly from you, and they'll put your name on their menu. And that's really cool because they're excited about local food. I really believe that we could max out production on all of our lots and still not be able to meet all of the demand of the restaurants and the community. So it's pretty exciting. It's a good time in urban growing here. So that was my little, thing about money and insurance. So I wanted to talk a little bit about state legislation. In the last couple of years, we've made some good progress here, and I alluded to this earlier. Just last summer, the Urban Farm Incentives Bill was passed. It helps with land access and affordability. What it does is it allows landowners who rent property to urban growers to get a reduction in their taxes. And so there's some standards for that. It has to be a certain size, there has to be a certain duration of the lease, and a variety of other things. But this is really important. I think it's going to help landowners who have vacant land, who aren't doing anything with it, who don't plan to do much with it for several years, perhaps rent it to some urban growers who can make some food on it in the meantime. We are at the stage now where all of the different city councils around Louisiana are implementing the specific regulations of the state law. And so stay tuned if you all are interested in this stuff. We'll be calling on you to help us with the New Orleans City Council as we move forward on this. Last year also we had the Farm to School bill that I mentioned. It was a very interesting process. Pepper and a couple of our other students at Loyola worked on this. They actually wrote the legislation that was introduced. And what it did is it increased what's called the minimum purchase threshold, which is the amount of money that a school can spend on a product before they go to a public bidding process. So generally speaking, a school over a certain amount of money for, let's say, strawberries, they have to put out a public bid. And then food providers will bid on this process. And it was so low, it was like $50,000 or $30,000 or less, $30,000 or something, that small farmers were essentially being priced out and also processed out. Small growers don't really have the time to do a big complicated public bidding process. They might not have the access to the computers. They might not have the time to put together the documentation. What this did is it raised that minimum purchase threshold to $150,000, and it will consistently raise, bless you, as the federal minimum purchase threshold raises, so in perpetuity. And so that's an amazing score for Louisiana. Now small-scale farmers can be contacted directly by schools for local fresh food under $150,000. That's huge. So that's pretty exciting. So we expect to see more fresh local food in schools in the coming years in Louisiana. And that's, of course, not only just great for the schools, it's great for the farmers, too, because it makes a local market for them. Another big one was the cottage food law. I mentioned this earlier. It allows individuals in their home kitchens to make certain products for sale, things like baked goods, candies, jams, etc. The original law was in 2013. There was a push for an update to it in 2014. We're hoping to see another update to it this year. To expand the products that are considered essentially low-risk products, things that are pickled, things that are preserved, things like that. And lastly, the big one that I want to mention is the state agritourism law. The state agritourism law actually helps us with the liability that I mentioned and insurance. What it does is it recognizes certain activities as agrotourism. So things like pick your own food, or things like what Johanna and I do. We give tours, we teach. They're all considered agrotourism activities, and that gives us essentially exemption from liability for certain things. So if somebody comes on my farm and slips and falls on a rake, as I said before, more than likely any kind of lawsuit would get thrown out under this agrotourism law. I always call it the clumsy tourist law. The state wants us to teach farming. They want us to have tours. They want us to welcome people to our urban gardens and involve the public in growing. And to do that, they are helping us because they know that liability insurance is hard to come by and it's expensive. They're helping us with that liability by waiving it, by essentially saying, you tourist, you agro-tourism person are responsible for your own self on these farm properties, and just beware, farming is a dangerous activity in a number of ways. There's holes, there's hills, there's bugs, there's rakes. Be aware and be mindful and enjoy the activity and don't hurt yourself. So that comes along with a giant warning that we have to post on the farm that looks kind of scary and mean. It's right on the front door, and it says something like, warning, too bad if you get hurt. Anyway, it's a great thing, essentially, that has been provided to us by the state because it does help us with liability. And all of these things that I've been talking about now are some of the solutions to the problems that I was talking about. So in particular, in New Orleans, we also have some help in terms of some of the issues I mentioned. The comprehensive zoning ordinance went through last year as well. It changed some of the definitions for where urban farming is allowed, PS like the RM4 designation. So we're actually legal now, where we weren't for several years of operation. It defined what sorts of things you could have on farms, bees, how many chickens, other animals, in what spaces. It talks about where you can and can't sell produce, a variety of those things, which are very important. Like I said, some of it not so great. Much of the things that were not so great weren't really intentional. They were just sort of accidental, I think, and also out of a lack of experience for farming. And so now there's several farming groups in New Orleans that are getting together to try and resolve some of the issues that came up in the new comprehensive zoning ordinance to enable urban growing. And I will tell you, the New Orleans City Council is very, very supportive, at least that I've found, with urban growing. Anything that I've brought to them that's been an issue, they have been willing to resolve, and so that's really great. And like I said, stay tuned, because we'll be asking for help on things going forward. The mobile vending permits was a very interesting issue. So the big problem was really that whole foods, meaning things like fruits and vegetables and fish, were lumped in with prepared foods like tacos and empanadas. And so we were trying to get more permits for mobile vending for like a farm truck. Y'all know Mr. Okra? Anybody know Mr. Okra? Yeah, okay. So Mr. Okra was like lumped in with like empanada antifada or whatever the heck they are. And so that's kind of a problem, because many of the restaurants are understandably concerned about the expansion of the food truck industry, right? But are not that concerned about the expansion of the fresh food industry. And the grocery stores, I think, probably don't care, because we have something like 17,000 people per grocery store here in New Orleans, so they probably could use some help. So anyway, we worked really hard with the City Council and the Food Truck Coalition and others to up the number of mobile vending permits, so people like our buddy Jim, who runs the shrimp truck that comes and goes, or Joe, who has the citrus vending, could have more trucks, or more people could get into that vending, because you can't sell from the property where you grow, and that makes it a challenge. So we successfully got 100 new permits. There are still some problems with that system as well that we're working through, but at least we have upped the concept of mobile vending for fresh foods in New Orleans, which is great. Our biggest argument was that here in the city, we have a lot of people who work unusual hours, and that they should have the opportunity to purchase fresh food like everyone else if a grocery store is closed. And mobile vending can do that. It can start early in the morning, it can end late at night. Right now, there's restrictions, but we're hoping that will change. And that was it. I wanted to give you all just sort of a background on policy and law and let you know that there are challenges out there. There is real work to be done in urban farming law for those of you who are interested. Pepper can attest to that. She's done quite a bit over the course of the last 2 years. And we're excited to be here. I enjoy running our farm just as much as I enjoy doing the legal work and policy work associated with it. I think there's a long way to go here before we have food security and are truly a pillar of food justice in the world, but I think we're making a lot of progress, and New Orleans is really a leader on this, which is impressive, and we're being recognized for it as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marianne. So both of our speakers have graciously made their PowerPoints available. We have put those up on the website if you would like to get either of their contact info going forward. So I guess we're going to kick it off with some questions. We have about 20 minutes left. So does anyone have any questions? Sure.
Have you started to get personal liability waiver for landowners who lease property for these kind of farms? Like I think there's one for people recreational use on their property.
So most of the private landowners I know require them to be a named insured. So what we have is liability insurance for our farm, and we name our landlords on an insurance certificate as well.
You don't think the state would pass a waiver like they do for recreational use? Or?
I don't think so. I don't think so. We get the waiver as the farm, but we have to maintain insurance for the property owner. So there is a little bit of a conflict there, because while it is cheaper for us to get insurance, we still have to make sure we have $1 million for the landowner.
What is the justification for the prohibition against on-premises sales?
I don't know. We have an exceptional situation because we are on state land in the city.
I don't know why they did that. There's a lot of laws that are still on the books that are remnants of things from the past. For example, you're not really supposed to have cisterns. You're not really supposed to have rain barrels because of old laws on malaria and yellow fever. And so we're trying to get those off the books because I don't know, maybe the last case of both of those was like 100 years ago in New Orleans. And so my best guess is that that has to do with something that was problematic in the past, some kind of sanitary law.
Joanne, any vandalism or theft
No.
of products?
Well, that's not entirely true. We have not had product issue. We have had people drive through our fields when they're not in production. So we don't have a fence up, but we are going to install bullards, which essentially stop vehicles from driving through. And we were using regular locks, like very large locks on our containers initially, and one of our containers was broken into and tools were stolen. But now we have like the puck locks on them. I don't know if you've ever seen a lock on a container, but there are these circular puck locks that are super secure, and we haven't had any issues since then. In 5 years, I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
Since this was sponsored by the Loyola Center for Environmental Law, I'd suggest that, considering the several years looking at changing in state legislation, city legislation, is to put up a little sample or example for other cities to what's the most recent enacted things, what is legacy, which has been around for a long time and perhaps doesn't need to do that. With the farmers markets in the past 6 or 7 years ago, that was one thing. Now there's a lot more going on. And I think it would be useful for other cities, other communities, to look at this body of law and regulations to make it easier for them, instead of having to reinvent the wheel.
That would kind of build on, who does have model policies. I'm curious about the status of the rainwater harvesting and the graywater, because I know that there's been a lot of talk about that, and I know that the adoption of the new plumbing codes, if you could talk on that. And then also regionally, is there any other leadership that you see outside of New York?
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Chicago has done a comprehensive rewriting of their zoning ordinance in support of urban agriculture. We helped them with that. Boston has done a comprehensive rezoning and reworking of their code to include urban agriculture. New York has been working on it for years and slowly implementing different things. And I would say we're probably the top four. I would like to say San Francisco. The reality is they didn't need to fix much. So they were kind of already ahead of the curve on urban growing. And so I would say starting with San Francisco, and then Chicago, Boston, New York are probably the leaders on this. It's where I usually go to look for existing things that we might want to have happen here. In terms of the rainwater stuff, yes, doing the plumbing code helped quite a bit. There was a change with backflow valves without getting too in the nitty-gritty, but there were some changes that were made that were beneficial to urban growing that had been on the books for some time that were somewhat antiquated based on the existing technology today. I expect to see, as we go forward with the change in the CZO, some kind of specific language about rain barrels and water catchment systems for the purpose of urban agriculture. Not for any other purpose, but at least for the purpose of urban agriculture.
And other leadership in the state that you see here in Louisiana? In urban farming, other parishes, is Jefferson Parish, St. Bernard, stepping up?
Sure. I think, and Johanna can probably talk about this too, when we first started the idea of spending a lot of time in New Orleans and a lot of money on infrastructure here, we looked at some of the other parishes that are doing things, and there's stuff all over. It's just not very well publicized. I feel like there's actually vertical growing up north in Louisiana. I mean, in terms of hydroponics and aquaponics, there's a lot of aquaculture systems where we buy our fish from other parts of Louisiana. And of course, Louisiana itself is a farming state, right? We have tons of farming in rural areas in Louisiana as well. And so I think there's a lot of infrastructure and leadership here, and that has been super helpful in it expanding again in New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans used to be a farming area too, right? We have a lot of historic houses that were once plantation homes, and so I feel like we're kind of going, I joke all the time, back to the roots, but the reality is that's true here. We have a history in growing, and we're just sort of taking it up again and making it new and maybe adding a new little modern twist to it. So I think the short answer is yes, there's lots of leadership. The Department of Agriculture and Forestry in Louisiana is super supportive. LSU Ag is super supportive. LSU as a whole is super supportive, the extension program, and we have a lot of help here. USDA has local agents who have been amazing here, have given us grants, have come and helped us with programs, have hosted good grower workshops. There's a lot of mental ability here and history and experience is just tapping into it.
So I would maybe diverge from that a little bit and say that I think there's a lot of farming going on. The vast majority of it is still commodity production, mostly rice and sugarcane. And I think that's been a pretty limiting factor in terms of the actual vibrant rural and regional food system. I think that the Ag Extension program has been very commodity focused, except for a handful of folks who have really tried to drive more on small scale localized production and organic production. But I think some like Mississippi is an interesting contrast. I think their Ag Extension program has been much more, for years, for a long time, aggressive about promoting smaller scale production helping small farmers access new like ethnic markets, doing things that I think have kind of moved forward small-scale production in Mississippi a lot faster than regionally in Louisiana. I think an organization doing a lot of really interesting work in the state is CLEDA, the Central Louisiana Economic Development Association, I believe, and they're in Alexandria. There's a really incredible farm in Alexandria called, you remember the name, it'll come to me.
A couple years ago that ran it.
No, it's, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. They're the ones with the vertical towers. I just can't think of them.
So it'll come to me. There's a really amazing farm in Alexandria it's actually a very large operation. They have a 20-acre vegetable farm. They do animal production. They're doing commodity production. Englewood.
Yes.
And they're the largest certified organic farm in the state. And they've made a real investment in wanting to, they have the resources to be able to transition to organic and to be a model for that region. They're doing like a huge CSA. They have like 1,000 people coming out to their farm every weekend for produce sales. So I think there's some really exciting stuff happening in central Louisiana around that farm and that organization. But I wouldn't say that I think we're necessarily killing it in what we're doing really on a regional basis.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I have a question, Marianne. We've talked about this before, but I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about fish, because what I'm interested in is that's something you don't normally see, or at least often see in different kinds of urban farming. And I wonder if they pose particular challenges to you, either legally or even technologically, just because of the waste systems involved and public health issues involved and things like that.
Yes.
And could you speak to that?
It's the short answer. So one of our farming systems is what's called aquaponics. It's a hybrid of aquaculture and hydroponics. And so we grow fish and plants in a joined recirculating system. And so we have raised garden beds where we grow plants, and then we have an in-ground, what we call the pond, right? Sometimes the lake, depending on how much rain there's been, at the farm that is covered and protected where we're raising catfish. And it's been interesting. Like I said, we had a couple of mass murders accidentally last year when the power went out after we had no sun for about a week. There are some specific legal standards with raising fish. One of the most interesting ones, I think, is that tilapia is illegal in New Orleans. Traditionally, tilapia is the fish of choice, mostly for aquaculture systems, because it grows like crazy. It's not very fussy. It can deal with a wide temperature range. I joke about them all the time. You could throw them in a bathtub with nothing more than 2 inches of water, and 6 months later they'd be double the size and have sucked the paint off the tub for survival. I mean, they're just like that resilient. But we don't get to grow those here because they would be an invasive species. They can take up residence in New Orleans waters, and so we don't want to do that. They are indigenous to Africa originally, and I can speak a little bit to this because we now have wild tilapia in Florida because of aquaculture systems. And so you can get a special permit for tilapia if you'd like. To me, it didn't seem like it was worth the aggravation to go through that. And so we raise catfish, and our catfish are fat and happy these days because we now have power on our lot. We thought it would be a good idea to do fish as well for 2 reasons. One, there's a market for it here. People are not afraid of whole fish. We do not kill and fillet our fish because that does require other permits, health permits, and processing permits, and all of those things that are expensive and difficult to get as a small operation. But here it's fine because people accept whole fish at market, and we can sell direct to restaurants and even consumers if we'd like. It does present an interesting challenge in terms of filtration. We don't have any type of synthetic filters. We have what we call a biofilter, and those are the plants that we're growing. The plants are twofold. One, they're a product, but 2, they act as the biofilter for the fish. So the fish are in the tank. They do what they do to survive and live. The water gets pumped into the vegetable beds. The vegetables absorb the nutrients that the fish make, and return the water cleaned to the fish tank. And it's a really nice system. It works really well. Our water is crystal clear. You should come visit and check it out. The other upside to that, too, is if we end up with too much fish waste, which we haven't yet, we've had a great balance, but you can also drain that off and use it as fertilizer for the soil-based crops. So it's a very eco-friendly, symbiotic system that we finally got right. Here.
So here in New Orleans, we have a lot of abandoned places.
Yes.
And it happens in other places as well. But let's sit here. What is the reality or the feasibility of, because you guys have larger plots. What is the feasibility of doing small plot, maybe raised bed, or a couple rows? Just city buys up a spot and gives it back to the people. What's the feasibility?
So
She can talk from experience on this.
Through my love of horticultural substances and botanical sciences, I reached out to small individual owners of like 30 by 100 feet. Like, this is one plot, okay? And through like mitigation and through connections from the people like through the Farm Network and others, I was able to find the Habitat for Humanity lots and turn them into urban growth spaces. When, I think when Ms. Johanna was talking about soil mitigation, it took years and years to get a 15-foot okra plant, craziness. I think there is a great connection between chefs and small growers because they want to see you grow. That, I think, really, Marianne speaks of New Orleans, of our locality, of our need to have sustainability within ourselves, and so I think there's a really great opportunity there for urban farmers to connect with homeowners. I think there needs to be a way for that conversation to happen because there are people that have land access and there are people but may not have the time to go forward with the implementation of making these urban environments.
And I have had several farms on private land, Habitat for Humanity land, and also private land over the course of the last 10 years.
I started growing in 2007.
Yeah, so nice.
I think some of the barriers to entry are you have to invest so much time and a certain amount of upfront costs to develop the soil and the property, and if you don't own that, if you don't have a long-term lease, then it can be challenging or just not worth it, And I think there's a lot of people that see this as an opportunity, but we don't recognize, I think, the economics involved in this. People do this out of the love of wanting to grow food, but they also need to make money, and that is a very, very hard thing to do. And so I think investing financial resources into people that want to do this, if we believe this is a community benefit, then trying to create some platform by which people could get paid for a certain period of time to maintain the lot, or whatever the fee structure could look like, or reason for paying people, in order to be able to get to a place of some small amount of income generation. It's hard to make money growing food. So I think we have to recognize that and just put money behind it if we actually want it to happen.
Great. Well, we are out of time, so we will, I'm sure Joanna and Marianne are happy to take any additional questions afterwards. Again, if you are here for CLE credit, please sign in with Allison. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here today.